dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon, and today I've got another book talk video to share with you guys. And today we are talking about My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Now, this one's a doozy. This one's a lot. It's a lot. And I should probably warn you that if you have any experience with sexual assault or sexual abuse of any kind, and hearing about that is something that is upsetting to you, you might not want to listen to this one, because that's what this is about. And I just wanted to give you that warning off the bat, just because, you know, these book talks are supposed to be fun, not cause you any upset. So now let's just get on into it. First of all, I'll just give you sort of a brief synopsis before I get into any spoilers. I'll give you a warning, don't worry, then you can decide if you want to click off and read it yourself or keep listening. So this book travels between two time periods. One is, I believe, 2000, and then the other is 2017. We follow back and forth between these two periods in the life of a girl named Vanessa. And in 2000, she's a 15-year-old student at a boarding school. And in 2017, she's like a 30-something woman who works as a concierge at a hotel. Now, the 2000 storyline is us getting to know Vanessa and what happened to her when she was 15. And then in the sort of present day 2017 storyline, we're seeing how it has continued to affect her, not only through the rest of her teenage years, but through the entirety of her 20s and now into her 30s, and will continue to affect her for the rest of her life. So when Vanessa is 15 years old, like I said, she's in boarding school. When we meet her, she's going into her second year at this school, so she is in grade 10. I'm guessing. She's 15 years old, which is the grade and age of my daughter. So reading this added that extra level of being able to picture what that looks like. And she's taking a bunch of classes. She's a bit of a loner. She doesn't have many friends. She had a friend, Jenny, in the first year that she was at the school, but they have a falling out over Jenny's boyfriend. And by the time we meet Vanessa in grade 10, they're not friends anymore. So she's kind of just doing her own thing. She's got her parents back home, who she goes to visit every so often, and they seem like nice enough people, you know. She seems like she had a pretty average sort of upbringing up until the time we meet her. He has an English teacher named Jacob Strain is his name. We'll just call him Strain from here on out, because that's how he's referred to mostly in the book. And he takes an interest in her, we'll say. She didn't have him the first year she was at the school, but in the second year she's got him as an English teacher, and then she joins a club, an after-school club for the literary magazine that the school puts out, and it's just her and him and this other student, a guy named Jesse. And it's kind of from there that everything really begins to accelerate. It starts quite simply with him just paying her the extra attention, and she likes that, you know. Everyone likes being paid attention to. It starts very simply with him, you know, touching her hand when he's helping her with something on the computer, or putting his hand on her back when he's showing her something. And so keep in mind, as we go on, she is 15 at this point, and he is 42, and her teacher. And so it's a lot about that, a lot about their relationship forming, and then we fast forward into the future, and it's 2017, when sort of the Me Too movement is picking up and accelerating, and Vanessa finds out that there's another girl who has complained about having an inappropriate relationship with Strain. And she's spoken up about it, and now a journalist is after Vanessa to tell her side of the story, tell what happened to her. Because as time goes by, word gets out at the school, which we'll get into when we get into the spoiler section, but word has gotten out, or word had gotten out back at the time when she was in school, and it ends up with her being essentially kicked out of the school and him living consequence free. So now in 2017, this journalist is after her to tell her story, but Vanessa is very reluctant because in her mind, when she looks back at the relationship that she had with him, it was essentially consensual from her point of view because she was intrigued by him. She fell in love with him, and so she doesn't look at what happened to her as abuse, even though when we look at this life that she has now in her 30s, it's very clear that even though that's not the way she looks at it, it's the way her life is unfolding. Her life is an absolute mess. And of course, we know that a 15-year-old, whether or not they verbally consent to something, it's still non-consensual. A 15-year-old can't consent to being in a relationship with a 42-year-old. So there's that. And so of course we know that it is and it was abuse. And there's just a lot. So I would say if you want to read this yourself and don't want the spoilers, now's the time to click away, because we'll get into sort of more of the spoilers. This is a difficult book to talk about, mainly because the subject matter is so difficult. It was a very difficult book to read, and it's a lengthy book, and as you're reading it, you're like, oh my god, I still have like 100 pages of this. And that's not in any way a critique of the way it's written. It's beautifully written. I loved the book, which sounds weird, but like I couldn't put it down. I couldn't stop turning the pages. Kate Elizabeth Russell is an amazing writer, but in terms of the subject matter, it's very heavy and it's just very difficult. So yeah, keep that in mind. Do keep that in mind. But yes, so if we're going to speak a bit now about spoilers, again, that's hard to talk about as well because there's not a lot of plot to this story. It's character driven. It's about Vanessa and about Strain and about all the other people in her life. There's not a lot of this happens and then this happens, not a lot of plot. It's a lot of conversations, a lot of uncomfortable time spent in bed with these two characters. And but yeah, the relationship goes on for months, and then what happens is her friend Jenny from the first year, she starts to notice that things look very strange. And so for Vanessa and Strain, they've kind of been together long enough at this point that they're not being quite as careful. Like he's more quick to, like, they're on a field trip at one point and they're having a conversation off on their own and he grabs her, and Jenny sees that. And I guess rumors have been circulating before she saw that, and of just Vanessa spending too much time with him in his office after hours, things like that. But Jenny hadn't really believed too much about that until she saw it with her own eyes, him grabbing her like that, and it kind of puts it all together in her head that maybe it's all true. So she confronts Vanessa, and Vanessa is very off-put by it and very offended because, of course, she loves him. Even though he's constantly manipulating her and gaslighting her, because on the outside, on the surface, he treats her very well. He's very kind to her, very gentle, very seemingly concerned about her feelings, but underneath there's an undercurrent of manipulation and gaslighting, as there would have to be in order for this relationship to even take place. And he keeps telling her, like, you can never tell anyone, because not only would I go to prison, which of course that alone she doesn't want, but he makes it, not only would I go to prison, but your life would be ruined too. This would always be attached to your name. You'd never escape it, and the state would probably take you away from your parents and put you in foster care. And she's like, why would they do that? And he's like, I don't know, they just might. You don't know how these things work. So he's just constantly keeping her terrified of the consequences should it ever come to light. And of course she doesn't want that, because she thinks that she loves him. So eventually Jenny goes to her father, who's on the board at this boarding school, and it all begins to fall apart. And like at this point, they've, like I said, been together for months, like seeing each other, sleeping each other on the school campus, at his home. A lot of very bad things happening. So then it all starts to fall apart once Jenny tells her dad, and they both get called into meetings. Vanessa's parents get involved, and instead of Strain being punished and taking the fall, Vanessa does. And she takes the fall for him, and she ends up getting kicked out of school, which comes as a total shock to her. She didn't think that was going to happen. She just thought, you know, because I should tell you, how she takes the fall is she says that it was all lies, that she made it up for attention or for whatever. So she just thought that would get them both off the hook. She'd take the blame, say she made it all up, and then they just, you know, forgive her. But instead they say, you broke the terms of, you know, the code of conduct of the school. We can't have you here anymore. And so then she goes home and she starts going to the local school, but even already it's affecting her life in that her and one of her high school friends, they sneak into a bar, and while her friend is, you know, flirting with, well, older boys, because they're at a bar, still closer to their own age, like say, I'm thinking of here in Canada, it's like 18 or 19 to go out, but I guess in America it'd be 21. It's like 21-year-olds. Vanessa finds herself drawn to this like old man sitting in the corner who's like closer to Strain's age. It's already like that's what she's drawn to because that's what feels comfortable. So after a couple of years pass, she calls him. She leaves a voicemail on his machine, and she ends up going to visit him, and they pick up where they left off, and seeing each other again, running around, keeping it in secret, and it's just a whole mess. And then in the fast forwarded scenes, like in 2017, we see that girl Taylor. So she's the one that comes forward and says that I think it was in 2006 or 7, or maybe even more recently, but she was in Strain's class at the boarding school, and he had been inappropriate with her. And there's a part of Vanessa that hates her for coming forward with this, hates her because like she doesn't want to think of him doing that with anyone else, although she does later find out that it didn't go any further than like groping her, which is still obviously absolutely horrific. But to Vanessa, she takes that as like a relief, that because he always told her it was so much different with her, he was in love with her, and she takes this knowledge that he only groped these other girls, because it comes out there's more than just Taylor, all these other girls, that he's just groped them. That's a relief to her, because she's like, oh, so he was always telling the truth. I was different, I was special. And it's just this whole thing, it's really sad, it's really scary, it's really disturbing, and it's difficult to read. So from there, well, kind of the end of his storyline, because they're on and off for years, up until I think she's 32 in 2017, maybe, if I'm doing the math right there. Yeah, 32. Like, they still get in touch with each other every so often, although they're no longer intimate, because he found as time went on that he was unable to, because she was so much older. So that was an unsettling revelation. So what kind of happens, what's kind of the final end of the line for Strain and his story is, once more people start coming out, Vanessa tells him there's a whole article that's going to come out that's going to talk about you, and you need to be ready for that. He calls her back later that night or the next day or something, and he tells her, you know, if you need to tell your story as well, I mean, go ahead. And then later that day, he jumps off a bridge into a body of water and dies there. And she had kind of known, before she even found out the news, she had kind of known, because he always said that he would die before he was labeled any sort of predator publicly. And he kept to his word on that. But what's interesting is that when the article finally comes out, he's not really the focal point of it. He's not really mentioned in it, because she was so difficult and not really cooperating, and she was kind of like the big hook to that story, because she'd had a relationship with him. Since she wouldn't really participate, the author kind of moves on to someone else who she can find people willing to participate in the story for. So in the end, the article that came out wasn't even really about him. And after he passes away, she ends up getting in the mail a box of mementos of all of their time spent together. Just this sad box of horrors, basically. Polaroids he had taken of her through the years when she was 15. And yeah, and then we just see as the time goes by, because we find out that he has passed away about halfway through the book. There's still a lot, and that continues with flashbacks and then her moving forward, and we just see, like, in her adult life, she hasn't been able to forge any meaningful relationships, whether friendship or romantic. And just everything's just a mess. And she begins to see a therapist, which the book ends, while not on a happy note, it kind of ends on a hopeful note. She gets a dog and that gives her some purpose to get out every day, and walk the dog. And she's seeing her therapist, and she's mourning Strain, getting ready to put him away, because she says, I don't know who I am. Like, she says that she can't remember a time before him, and it's hard to move on and try to pick up the pieces. And it's been, a 17-year-long mess of a relationship, and he knew it before the first time they were together. He whispers or mumbles, I'm gonna ruin you, as kind of like, not in a happy way, in like a, we're here, we're gonna do this, I can't help it, I can't control myself, this is what we're gonna do, but in sort of a sad way, I'm gonna ruin you. He knew it, but he did it anyway. And there's also a point when she's talking to her therapist, and she says, I need this in my mind to be a love story, because if it wasn't a love story, then what was it? And over time, she begins to sort of come to grips with the fact that she is a victim of abuse. No matter what, no matter how she felt about him, it wasn't right and it wasn't okay. And yeah, it kind of ends on a hopeful note that maybe, hopefully, going forward, things will be okay for Vanessa. So there you go, you guys. That was My Dark Vanessa, which is a Vladimir Nabokov reference. It's her name, but My Dark Vanessa's a Vladimir Nabokov reference, which, if you're unfamiliar, he wrote Lolita. So that's a little tie in there. Anyway, I hope you're having a good weekend. I hope you have a happy Easter, and I will see you guys on Monday. Bye.